It started with an itch. Have you heard about the condition known as foreign limb syndrome? It's where an individual becomes convinced that some part of their body no longer belongs to them. No matter how diligently doctors try to convince them otherwise, they can't accept the disputed appendage. It's as if the estranged limb or body part is an unauthorized transplant in their compromised view. Sometimes they obsess over this incredibly powerful compulsion so much that they ask third world surgeons to actually remove their alien limb. In rare cases, they successfully manage to locate unscrupulous people to satisfy those requests. No one knows what causes this horrifying condition, and until very recently, I was baffled by it as everyone else. I just assumed the phenomenon denoted the mark of madness, hypermasochism, and some advanced level of instability. I believed it also had to stem from prolonged narcotic or psychedelic drug use. Nothing else made sense. The destructive obsession that some part of the body you were born with wasn't really you appeared to be a dangerous delusion. Like the others, I was fascinated by the condition from a casual observer standpoint, but I never expected to be afflicted by it myself. Let me begin by saying, I'm fully aware that to believe in such things comes across as highly irrational. We know our bodies literally like the back of our hands. When a person incurs an injury, they feel the pain associated with it. They recognize the wound is physical damage to their own person. After reading the details below, documenting my own personal descent into this madness, I hope you'll recognize that it was authored by a sober, fully lucid person. Despite you recognizing my genuine level of clarity up until this point, I freely confess that I've also been afflicted by the same foreign limb madness mentioned earlier. I wanted to share this harrowing account in order to explain that the same malicious thoughts can strike anyone. No one is immune. These deranged feelings may be divorced from reality, but they are just as real to the afflicted as the sun way up in the sky. Also, like the other souls before me, there's no convincing us of the rational facts. I'm 100% convinced now that parts of me aren't and weren't me any longer. Despite taking matters into my own trembling hands, the list of alien body parts attached to my person has continued to grow. Even with the extraordinary measure of multi-self amputations, it hasn't been enough to hold back the aggression level of foreign tissue assimilation. Nor has it stemmed my desire for more of these gory mutilations to sate the maddening compulsions. I fear that soon, no part of me will be original, and that all that will remain will be a pale, counterfeit imposter of my former self. This all started out with a tingling sensation inside my left nostril. I looked around like most would do to make sure the coast was clear. Then I discreetly went in to dislodge the irritating boulder clogging up my nose. Immediately I was struck by a lingering sensation that my tunneling index digit was exploring someone else's nasal cavity. It sent an involuntary shudder down my spine, which I couldn't shake. The sensation was both powerful and irrefutable. Intellectually I knew it was my nose, yet I also knew emotionally it was not. I immediately dislodged my finger like I'd been caught mining for gold by some gawking bystander. The thing was, there was no one else around to see my uncouth behavior. I was fully alone. Reacting that way made me felt ridiculous, but not only for the obvious reason of it being in bad taste. After recoiling in revulsion, I was hesitant to revisit the nasal passageway again because I felt like I'd violated another person's body. Creepy wouldn't even begin to cover how odd it felt. It was like examining a lifeless cadaver's orifice. While I touched familiar areas of my nose still attached to me, from a certain point inside, it was definitely another person's foreign skin. Somehow my left nostril had been replaced and the unexplained replica had been fused to my own. My pulse raced in mounting terror. What inhumane creature could do such a bizarre operation? and what happened to my real skin. Even if I could appeal to the mercy of the morbid entity who'd performed this biological monstrosity, would it be able to return me back to a whole individual again? Was I doomed to exist with another person's nasal passage unnaturally joined to my face? Those nightmarish thoughts and many other equally horrifying consumed me. In light of the terrible realization that my body was under attack, I couldn't focus on anything else, but things were about to get infinitely worse. Just as the side of my nose had been replaced, the tips of my fingers started feeling foreign too. It was as if the point of contact with my nasal passage had infected me everywhere they traveled. Rapidly, I felt the onset of imposter flesh all over my body. Many parts of my body started tingling and itching. Everything I'd innocently touched, I felt numb and foreign. It suggested an eventual seizure of my entire body in just a short incubation period. I went from a happy, carefree existence to worrying I wouldn't be able to stop the alien tissue replacement long enough to even document the frightening conspiracy. I was determined to fight back, but I didn't know how to achieve success. The unknown force consuming my identity piecemeal was winning the battle. I had to act decisively before I wasn't me any longer. As these radiating fears escalated, so did my level of desperation. Reluctantly, I realized that drastic measures were necessary to regain control. I had to violently excise the artificial flesh, lest the terrifying imposter disease spread even more. Cutting off the left side of my nose to spite my malignant face wasn't going to be easy. For starters, the sheer pain of self-mutilation is excruciating. You've probably never experienced anything which approaches that degree of morbid intensity. My nerve endings were still attached to the foreign flesh. No matter how painful it was, I had to carve back enough of my own skin until I'd severed away all the counterfeit tissue. It was all about risk management. I bled profusely and nearly passed out from massive blood clots, but it was fully worth it in my mind. I was on my way to freeing myself of the foreign tissue, pretending to be me. A glorious mixture of excruciating agony and ecstasy filled my mind. The only problem at that point was that my fingertips bore the same telltale tingling as my nostrils had before I'd covered off. Touching the diseased area had obviously spread it to my fingers. It was a rookie mistake to not use surgical gloves. Full freedom was close by, but I had one more drastic thing to do. The ends of my fingertips had to be chopped off, and there was an even uglier decision to make. How much should I amputate? Midway through, up to the joint? I made a particularly tough choice to go all the way to the second knuckle. Better to be safe than sorry, I decided. It was a hard call, but I didn't want the insidious takeover of my body to spread any further. I had a curling iron ready to cauterize the severed nubs, but I still feared going through with it. It was going to be intense. Worse than the immense pain itself was that I had trouble holding the branding iron afterward to cauterize my hemorrhaging wounds. You don't realize all that your body does until you lose parts of it to an invasive foreign infection. With my blood loss, I was tempted to go to the hospital, but I feared they wouldn't take my rational testimony seriously. Once I'd successfully excised all the foreign tissue from my remaining body, they could think me crazy all they wished. I'd gladly enter a padded cell. I was determined to prevent any further imposter spread until then. Deeply troubling was the lingering itch to the top of my ears which came next. I thought for certain I'd finally eliminated all the alien tissue. With my finger stumps, I reluctantly held a pair of large fabric shears and counted down. When I reached 0, I snipped off the top portion of both ears like they were unwanted pieces of discarded cloth. No sooner than my nerve endings quit throbbing from the masochistic abuse, my tongue also began to itch. It was horribly frustrating to sacrifice so much of myself in the name of body autonomy and yet still come up short. Perhaps even worse than losing 2 finger joints in the ongoing war was the immense sacrifice of severing off the tongue. It was my sole means of verbal communication, and losing it was impossible to compensate for. I was filled with a spiraling sadness greater than all the other losses combined. But I realized that it was already gone. The foreign thing hiding at the top of my mouth wasn't mine, and I kept reminding myself of that while the sharp blade sliced through it. I prayed that it was the very last artificial body part I would have to remove, but it wasn't to be. In all, I amputated or sliced off 24 large and small body parts before losing consciousness. I was discovered by EMTs doing a wellness check, barely clinging to life. They stabilized me for the time being, but I've been indefinitely confined to a sanitarium for so-called self-harm. No amount of effort could convince the doctors and staff I wasn't harming myself. I was removing foreign tissue from my own body which didn't belong there. They reacted to my controversial statements as I did when I first heard of foreign limbs syndrome. They looked at me like I am deeply deluded and unstable, all except one frightened psychiatrist who made the mistake of touching one of my festering wounds yesterday. Fluids from the alien tissue assimilating my body must be highly contagious. I can tell by the terrified look in his eyes that he's got the same deadly itch too. It won't be long before he's a patient here in a room next to me. Let's hope his own freedom comes with less personal amputations.